We're here today to speak with one of the contributors to our new book, How to Heal Our Divides. Reverend Dr. Alexia Salvatierra is the author with Dr. Peter Heltzel of Faith-Rooted Organizing, Mobilizing the Church in Service to the World. She's a Lutheran pastor with over 40 years of experience in congregational, English and Spanish, and community ministry, including church-based service and community development programs, congregational community organizing, and legislative advocacy. She serves as assistant professor of integral mission and transformational development for the School of Intercultural Studies for Fuller Theological Seminary, as well as coordinator of a professional certificate program for Hispanic pastors and church leaders at Fuller's Centro Latino. She coordinates the ecumenical collaboration for asylum seekers and serves on the leadership team of Matthew 25, Mateo 25, a bipartisan Christian network to protect and defend families facing deportation in the name and spirit of Jesus. She serves as a consultant, training, facilitating, organizing, and leading strategic planning for a variety of national and international organizations, including World Vision, InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, and the Christian Community Development Association. So, Alexia, it's really wonderful to have you participate in this program. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome, Brian. Great to be here.
So I touched briefly on, some of the things that you've done, but maybe if you don't mind, you've got an amazing background before all the things that I just described. So would you like to talk about that for a moment?
Okay. So, I've been in ministry for a very long time, and that includes being a missionary in the Philippines for a few years, where I was part of the pro-democracy movement against the dictator Ferdinand Marcos. So that was life transforming. I also was the director for 11 years of CLU, which is Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice. And was an interfaith organization where we actually formed this faith-rooted organizing model that I've been teaching and training all over the world. And I've been involved in immigration in one way or another all my life, and also in issues of homelessness and working poverty, because I really do believe that I'm called, I have the spiritual gift of justice, which is a larger story. But in addition.
Well, I know you're being modest too, because you've got all kinds of different awards too.
I got some awards along the way.
And I just want people to know that, how accomplished you are.
Uh-huh.
But I think one of the things we wanted to talk about specifically today is your Matthew 25 program. So could you give us more of a overview of that?
Sure. So Matthew 25 was formed in December of 2016 when a number of faith-rooted organizers, including a number of evangelical Christian community organizers from all over the country, were together at the Highlander Center in Tennessee, which is, of course, where Rosa Parks was trained. And we were in prayer about what the administration of Donald Trump might mean for people for our country, period. And part of what really struck us was that it was very important to form a bipartisan Christian network to stand with and defend vulnerable individuals and families in the name and spirit of Jesus. So I have to step back and talk a little bit about the theory of change under that, because part of our assumption was, when we talk about this network, is that it would be immigrant churches and non-immigrant churches working together in intimate partnership. And then what later evolved that we didn't have in December of 2016 was that we needed a third leg, which we call our puentes, who are bilingual, bicultural Latinx millennials, who would help bridge immigrant and non-immigrant congregations working together as vulnerable, as the first focus of Matthew 25. We always left it a little open in terms of vulnerable people, but the first focus of Matthew 25 was immigrants, and it has continued to be immigrants in Southern California. So we originally had a national vision, but then we focused in on Southern California. And we've built a network of about 200 churches and a number of schools, Christian schools, that work together. I want to say something about the theory of change, though, because that theory of change is something that some of us have been working on for many years. There's, in the arena of immigration, most Americans want an immigration policy that is effective, fair, just, and humane. There have been 2 bipartisan proposals, and they poll at over 70% support, the components of the proposals. These are big, comprehensive immigration reform. Over 70% is good, right? The DREAM Act polls over 90%, right? But we haven't been able to pass them. And it's because the average American, looks at these proposals and says, yeah, that's an immigration system I would like, but they don't care. It's not about them. They don't have any passion. And then immigrants who care deeply, obviously, and their networks, don't have any hope that they can create change. And so the only people who call the legislators are the people who are adamantly anti-immigrant. And so we can't pass any of this legislation. So we continue to have an immigration system that is ineffective, illogical, and inhumane. So let me back up. The church is maybe the only institution in the country where people are called to care passionately about people who are not them and to have hope where there's no hope. So very clear that the church should be the headlight here and not the tail light. But you can't do that unless immigrants and non-immigrants come together across the lines. So we knew from the beginning that it needed to be bipartisan if it was going to have an impact, and that it needed to be immigrants and non-immigrants coming together across the line so you would have the exchange of hope and passion, so that people who didn't have any passion about this would experience their brothers and sisters who were being directly affected, and that would awaken them to their spiritual call, and that people who didn't have any hope would experience that they had allies, and that would awaken them to the spiritual promise. So you have the exchange of hope and passion if you bring people together. So that was always the theory of change under Matthew 25 and Mateo 25, is to bring people together in this body of Christ relationship. But the last thing I need to say, Brian, about this is that just coming together, if you don't come together as the body of Christ, doesn't work. Doesn't work across partisan lines and doesn't work across immigrant and non-immigrant lines, even with the help of Puentes. And so it's a certain way that people come together, and it's coming together not intellectually, but in doing common mission together, in loving people together in the name and spirit of Jesus. That's what creates the trust that allows people to see the world through each other's eyes, which allows for the kind of unity to form that we need to have the exchange of hope and passion. So I'm sorry that was a lot, but I really wanted to give you the big picture.
Certainly. Well, you mentioned that there's a network of 200 churches roughly in Matthew 25. So can you describe a little bit about how some of them work together on this project?
Sure, absolutely. We started out, actually, our very first campaign as Matthew 25, Mateo 25 fell into our laps. It was a Hispanic Assemblies of God pastor who had what we call, there are 3 lines you can stand on to immigrate in this country. We call them blood, sweat, and tears. Blood is family relationships, sweat is occupation, and tears are refugee status. He actually had all 3. He had a blood case, a tears case, and a sweat case. But he had come to the country running from Guatemala when he was a teenager and had been deported 3 times while he was a teenager to Mexico, even though he was Guatemalan. And if you've been deported and come back, you can't look at your qualifying cases in our immigration system until that deportation order is removed, which can be, as one judge said to me, like the 20-year pulling of a wisdom tooth and can cost $1 million. And that was pre-Trump. So, we had a little workaround mechanism that had developed actually under the Bush administration and then had been used widely under Obama, which was that you could have this deferred deportation, which is what the Dreamers have, which is you come every year, you make sure you haven't committed any crimes, you make sure you're contributing, you get to stay another year while you're fighting your case. So under the Trump administration, he was detained and scheduled to be deported. And he was Assemblies of God pastor in good standing. So we were really all able to come together on the case of this particular person and fight for him. And that that really built a level of relationship right there. And then we have a number of support circles all around Southern California. And the support circles are immigrant leaders and non-immigrant leaders and puentes in the same support circle that accompany a particular individual or family. Now, forming these kinds of support circles around asylum seekers is nothing new. Churches have been doing it since 1940. But we do it differently because there are immigrants in the circles who are supporting, and because we have a family network of all of the guests that where we develop leaders. So there's a really taking seriously the full humanity and the full membership in the body of Christ of the people who are being served. So it's a different model. It's a body of Christ model, and that's how people work together, is in those circles. But we also work together when there's a larger push. Like we all had a press conference recently for the Dreamers, and we were able to get people across the whole political spectrum to be in that press conference.
Wonderful, wonderful. So the support circles, I mean, that sounds like a really grassroots, person by person type of program.
Yes, that's what transforms people. That's right. That's my experience. We want shortcuts, but the shortcuts don't work very well. I mean, like the Evangelical Immigration Table, which I was one of the co-founders of, is an amazing organization. When we went public in 2012, we had the broadest cross-section of participation from evangelical leaders since abolition in a social justice issue. So amazing. We had Southern Baptists and Jim Wallace, and if any of you know who those people are, but just the whole spectrum, focus on the family and everybody. And we were able to move the dial. Like in 2013, we actually passed a comprehensive immigration reform proposal in the Senate. That had not happened. It stalled in the House. But when certain forces in our country began to animate people's fear around immigrants, it didn't hold. So we had been able to make major changes in people's attitudes, but they weren't deep because they weren't rooted in the kind of experience that we create in Matthew 25. So it takes much more time and energy to create that experience, but it creates deep commitment rather than a more superficial commitment that can be washed away by a different kind of movement.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So the 200 churches that you mentioned that are part of the Matthew 25 network, how are they distributed both geographically as well as, kind of like denominationally or some other way?
So, we started in Southern California. We originally, like I said, we actually started the first group that came up with the idea of Matthew 25, Mateo 25, was national. But none of us at that time had any idea how vicious, and I can't use any other word, it's the word, how vicious the Trump administration would be in their anti-immigrant perspectives and policies. So we thought we could create it all over the country, but we didn't understand how bad it was going to get. And so we thought, well, let's try it in Southern California as a sort of model. And then that's all we ended up doing was Southern California. We actually have a larger project that we've been doing with Sojourners and CCDA that has done some parallel work to this, some similar work in Washington, D.C. with African-American congregations. And now we're doing it with Black and Brown leaders together with Duke and in North Carolina. So there's some hopes that this model can be done other places. I didn't even mention that part of what Matthew 25, Mateo 25 involves is this professional certificate training program that we do for Hispanic pastors, because if you can't build up the capacity of the people who are most affected, you can't have an equal partnership, even if you're working together. So we have this training program that we do out of Fuller, out of Central Latino, and we're doing a similar training program with Black and Brown pastors right now in Duke. So there's we're trying to figure out how you can export it from Southern California, but right now it's in Southern California. But we have the whole spectrum of denominations that you can imagine, from the most conservative denominations to some of the most liberal denominations, although we tend to engage the more moderate congregations from the liberal denominations, because they're the people who are willing to work with the people across the whole evangelical Pentecostal spread. Or the more radical congregations are not interested in that. Just like, the divide is deep, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So would you anticipate better receptiveness to immigration reform now, given the change of administration? How do you look at the future going forward after the setback that we had?
So definitely the new administration has already undone some of the worst policies because they weren't passed legislatively, they were executive orders. There were over 400 executive orders and regulations that the Trump administration put in place, all of them restrictive and a number of them vicious, like I said. He's been undoing them rapidly. The things that could be undone by executive orders, he's been undoing. But there's larger reform that's needed, has been needed since before the Trump administration, has been needed for a long time, like I said. And so there's a good proposal that the administration is supporting. It doesn't have a chance of passing because the truth is that immigration never is at the top of anybody's list except for immigrants. Getting this through would take a level of commitment that I don't think is the priority of enough people. But I think we can get something through that will be helpful, but it will require coming together across the Great Divide. Otherwise, it won't happen. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The work that we're doing is still really necessary if we're going to have a sane and effective and humane immigration system.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you think there's a little bit better atmosphere for making that happen? You mentioned spreading, beyond Southern California to, a couple of other locations in the United States. Yeah, right, do you see more of that happening?
How would I say this? I think that this is a critical time. I think people have grown very attached to their tribal positions. And so I think it's going to take a lot of work, deep work, to shift people. I see some people who were stuck in their positions out of fear, out of what I believe to be fear. Like Lindsey Graham has co-sponsored the DREAM Act again, something that he had done historically and then had pulled away from during the Trump years. So to me, that's, he's less afraid. He can begin to come out and I think that that's true on a grassroots level as well, that people in communities are more willing to talk to each other, are less frightened of retaliation than they were. But I still think that we have these hardened paradigms right now. And in a lot of bruising, there's a lot of what I think of as spiritual and emotional bruising that has gone on in this country, lobbing fireballs across the lines. And so I think that part of what happens to people, Brian, in these relationships of working together in joint mission that is simple, that is concrete, that is full of love, is that the paradigms soften because you've seen this person as the enemy. But now when you work together, you're discovering them as a brother or sister, and it begins to make you question the rigidity of the paradigm. It's like, I've been taught that this person is a demon, but they're not. So maybe other things I've been taught aren't as true as I thought they were. So there's a softening that goes on in these relationships that I think is critically necessary right now. There is some softening that I see in the big picture, but I don't know how far it will go without these kinds of intentional interventions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how do you see Matthew 25 growing? What are some specific steps that are being taken along that regard?
Well, with the Diplomado, like I said, which is this professional certificate, was created for Southern California. We've done 3 cohorts. We're about to do the 4th. But because it's online, we started having more and more people from around the country participate. So now we've decided that we're going to be really intentional about, and in fact, Tier Fund is working with us at Fuller now to develop a Latin American branch of it. We had a few people from Latin America who've come into it. And so they're saying, let's be really intentional about developing a Latin American branch of it because they have immigration problems too. They just look different. They actually have Great Divide problems. but they look a little different. So, but we are really reaching out. We now have a version of it in English, which we started because of the young people, because the Puentes really preferred English in terms of their training program, and we had to get them in it too. So, but we're actually having a number of people who are not immigrants or related to immigrants, or are not even Latinx, who want to do this program. So, I think immigration as an issue is a good bridge issue, potentially. It's been a really powerful wedge issue, but it's a good bridge issue because we are, after all, a country of primarily people who came from somewhere else.
Exactly.
Right? So there is a common ground here that, it's a common ground as in other ways, as well as a sacred common ground.
Absolutely.
Well, definitely the professional certificate. And then we're working on, this work that we've been doing with CCDA and Sojos at Duke, which is very intentionally Black and brown pastors coming together around dehumanization, criminalization, how to reverse that. That has a lot of potential because that's also going to end up, it's online and it's synchronized online, which is a little different. But if we keep doing it, we're going to end up again involving people from all over the country. And then I know that Sojourners has some vision about how to organize communities of practice coming out of the diplomado. So I'm hoping that work gets funded. They're trying to fund it. Because I have a sense that this professional certificate program, which brings people together in these ways, on the issue of immigration, has some potential. Because it's a holistic program. It helps you understand how to do trauma and resilience care with immigrant families. It helps you understand how to do legal clinics in your church, and it also helps you understand how to do advocacy. And it also connects it all on the sacred ground of why biblically we do any of this. So, it really is a holistic program. You see, what the church can do is work with people holistically, not just in terms of their ideas about policies. I don't have a lot of hope for bringing people together in terms of their ideas about policies or other place they connect.
So if we could, maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the trauma involved in people needing to shift their mindset, shift their paradigm as they reconsider some of the things that they held closely.
Sure. It's always painful to adjust your paradigm, right? Because it's frightening. It's like, what if everything I know is wrong? How am I going to function? Well, everything you know isn't wrong. Some of it is wrong, right? But there is that kind of shakiness and disorientation, and that's scary and it's painful. But it's way more painful if you've been in a war. We have a civil war in this country, right? It's not acted out in violence, but people have lost their relationships with their family members, with their oldest friends, right? And so when you have sacrificed for something and then you have to let it go, you have a double wound. You have the loss of letting go and, some of the fear and shame around that. And then you also have the double pain of all you've sacrificed to hold on to that, when it seems like the sacrifice maybe wasn't worth it. So we find in Matthew 25, Mateo 25, that we have to really walk with each other pastorally. We have to walk with each other through the trauma in compassionate ways, in healing ways, in prayerful ways. Because otherwise, people stop. They won't go through the ring of fire. And I think we have to just recognize that this is not an intellectual reconciliation that we're calling for in this country. It's whole person, right? Soul, emotions, bodies, actions. And there is, I believe as a Christian, that God has placed in each of us his image, which means that each of us have this movement like a plant towards the light, towards healing. So that pushes us forward. But we also have a brokenness in all of us, human sin, we would call it, that pulls us back. So that it hangs in the balance, right? It hangs in the balance. And so I have great hope for where we can go as a country particularly if the church is the church, does what the church is called to do. But I also don't have any certitude that we're going to get there.
Well, I think it's going to take time. That's one of the
Yes, healing takes time. Intellectual decisions can be fast, but healing takes time.
Yeah.
Internal and interpersonal.
And, even our church situation, within the United States is so fragmented.
Oh, and one of the things I want to say about that we just need to face, because it's a really hard truth, but if we don't face it, we can't go anywhere, is that roughly between 70 and 85%, depending on who you talk to, of white evangelicals supported the Trump administration, and between 70 and 85% of Black evangelicals didn't. Hispanics are right up there, close, just a little bit under Black. So we've got a color divide in the church. It's not even just an ideological, it's an ideological divide that is rooted in different perspectives that are rooted in different experiences. And so, for the church to unite, we have to recognize that that's what we're looking at. It's not just ideological. It goes
Absolutely. No, it's several dimensions all polarized against each other. Well, Alexia, I really appreciate the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for being part of this project to share your work and Matthew 25's work so that it can build more awareness, and hopefully we'll be able to help you do that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.